Friends, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. So let me begin by saying that I'm greatly privileged and honored to be sharing the stage with thinkers and scholars as distinguished as Shri Ram Madhavji, Dr. Bajaj, and of course the Venerable Mr. M.J. Akbar. I dare say that I've had a pretty productive life in soldiering, but not exactly scholarship. Some are of the view that the two are contrarian impulses. So I was pleasantly surprised to get an invite to discuss this book by Akbar Sahab, GANDHI, A Life in Three Campaigns, a book on one of the greatest Indians ever, venerated as the Mahatma by one of the most iconic writers of our times, Shri M.J. Akbar. I must also confess that I am the only non-expert on the panel, but I have read the book. So I first got familiar with Mr. Akbar's writings when he, as perhaps many in this room, when he wrote for the Sunday and later when he wrote for and managed the Asian Age. But it was while reading Tinderbox, The Past and Future of Pakistan, that I sensed the deeper genius of the man. The manner in which he traced the journey of an idea, the people, circumstances, and mindsets that divided India was quite brilliant. The sheer power of research, meticulous scholarship, his ability to capture the sweep of history, the machinations of statecraft, the intersection of religion and politics, all in this very fluent, engaging style, was hugely impressive, very endearing. GANDHI, A Life in Three Campaigns is a continuation of that art and that craft. So I really would urge you to read that book. Unless you get a sense of Mr. Akbar's prose and writing, you will not get the essence of that book. And therefore, we are all richer in consequence. The book, in my view, is indeed a masterly rendering of how the Mahatma dismantled the mightiest empire in the world through three pivotal mass campaigns which Mr. Akbar spoke about. And I'm a soldier, for I come from the world of violence, and yet the way he has put it, and it really brings to life the great achievements of Mahatma Gandhi in dismantling the British Empire. As I said, you'll have to read the book to grasp the power and profundity of the narrative. But let me, in all humility, see if I can capture for you some of the salient aspects. I will quote extensively from the book, often verbatim, for there is little point in fiddling with Mr. Akbar's delightful prose. Interestingly, as Mr. Akbar points out, history's biggest non-violent revolution occurred around the same time as history's biggest violent revolution, in India under Gandhi and in Russia under Lenin. So that also got me thinking that also this all happened in a time when much of the world embraced military force as the chosen instrument for dispute resolution in international affairs. Gandhiji's peaceful mass movements kind of straddled the two world wars. So violence was rife. That makes Mr. Gandhi's choice of non-violence as the preferred medium even more remarkable. Was this realism, as Mr. Akbar asked? Or perhaps it was idealism of a very canny kind. A peep into some of the tenets of the Mahatma's political persona and philosophy that Mr. Akbar records in this book, and those that undergirded these three campaigns with the brilliance of a meteor and the impact of a whirlwind, to quote Mr. Natwar Singh, may also be pertinent. The concept of Swaraj, for example, the Mahatma categorically rejected a replica of English rule without Englishmen, an Englistan or an India governed by a thin English-speaking elite. That, Gandhi said, is not the Swaraj I want. India would never be free, he underlined, until it abandoned the Western civilization bred by colonialism. Home rule meant self-rule, a Hindustan and not an Englistan. Gandhi's analysis of British rule also upturned conventional thinking. As Mr. Akbar said, India had succumbed not because of British strength, he argued, but on account of Indian weakness. The English are not in India because of their strengths. We keep them in India because of our weaknesses, he asserted. Not succumbing to Indian weaknesses, in fact, their resolute addressal would become the central plank of the Gandhian strategy, often at great cost. But on this overarching principle, he would simply brook no compromise. The Chauri Chaura incident and the issue of the depressed classes, suppressed classes, and separate electorates. The Mahatma's linkage of Swaraj and Swadeshi was equally unique. In an age in which the British Raj seemed invincible, Gandhi was certain that the Raj would collapse once Indians lost their fear of the white man, rediscovered unity, and most importantly, revived the skills that had created demand for their products across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Spice Root Plus or whatever. Swadeshi as the essential precursor to Swaraj was his ardent belief. And the fortitude and conviction emanating from such a political philosophy would translate into purposeful action in the pivotal campaigns to follow, laying low the assertion of Lord Curzon that Indians only prattle, they only talk, they never take any effective steps. Gandhiji's most significant achievement, as Mr. Akbar said, was to lift Indians out of the abyss of fear, knowing fully well that once fear began to lift, freedom was a matter of when and not if or whether. You know, he carries out a splendid analysis of the state of Punjab after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And look at what he says. 3 points he makes. One is that the state which furnished the largest number of soldiers to the British government during World War I, it was accepting oppression with docility. They was taking brutal excesses lying down. This is the first point. He was surprised. A state which had such a rich tradition and narratives of valor, intellect, and spirituality. The hymns of the Rig Veda were first sung here. Home to Takshila, battlefield of Mahabharat. A Punjab that had shattered Alexander's dream of a worldwide domain was made to crawl before the British. So breaking the shackles of intimidation, liberating Indians from fear and fatalism was a matter of foremost priority in the Gandhian strategy to secure freedom. He would leverage the courage spawned in consequence to ignite the fervor of resistance to a foreign government by ceasing to cooperate with it through a novel coinage, the non-cooperation movement, launched, as we all know, on the 1st of August 1920, and designed specifically to deflate the currency of colonialism. So brilliant was the conception and so immaculate the execution of the campaign that within a mere 15 months, public enthusiasm had reached boiling point. This was news to me. To quote Mr. Subhash Chandra Bose, writing about the impact much later in 1935, "It is not possible at this distant date," said Mr. Bose, "to understand how profoundly the people of India believed in 1921 that Swaraj would be won before the end of the year. We might have been liberated by 1922, some 25 years earlier. The most sophisticated people shared this optimism. That was the energy that fueled the movement. So close was it to success when a somewhat dictatorial Gandhi, disappointed by an old Indian weakness, the violence in Chauri Chaura, called off the movement in the face of massive opposition, even virtual isolation in the Congress. A huge setback, certainly, but Gandhiji was determined to not let it undermine the larger strategic aspiration and purpose. But what moral courage! What moral courage! After a wait of 8 years, a period of intense reflection and renewal, Gandhiji launched the second campaign for freedom through a deliberate breach, as we all know, of the unjust salt laws, the salt satyagraha of 1930. But this is what is important. The idea for this came to Gandhi in a simple, intuitive flash. Salt, he said, belonged to India. British tax on India's salt was higher than the cost of obtaining it. Like air and water, salt was the greatest necessity of life. Every human being of every faith needed salt. So Gandhi, at the head of a non-violent column of satyagrahis, would march from his ashram to the Gujarat post and break the law that punished the starving, the maimed, and the helpless. He signaled to the British that the poor were the salt of the earth. Not everybody shared Gandhiji's enthusiasm. The Calcutta-based statesman found the idea comical and puerile. Nehru wondered whether the salt march had sufficient gravitas. Gandhi, in contrast, glowed with conviction. He turned a pinch of salt into this great symbol of British exploitation and fiscal profession, and so on and so forth. The government responded with violence. Censorship was imposed. Every major Congress leader was locked up, and the fervor of non-cooperation was back. Now, this is how, Gandhiji fueled these cycles of protest and arrest. American journalists compare salt with the tea chest at Boston in 1776, an act of defiance that launched the American Revolution. A series of events led to the Gandhi Year of Impact and the suspension of civil disobedience in 1931. Now, what is significant here is for the first time, an Indian signed a formal document, as Mr. Akbar records, as an equal of the Viceroy, the phraseology therein echoing that of peace treaties between nations. Even Subhash Chandra Bose was taken aback by the popular acclaim for Gandhiji after the pact. But just when victory seemed to be around the corner again, another Indian frailty intervened. This time it was untouchability. The issue of suppressed classes, we have suppressed them, Gandhi argued, and in consequence have suppressed ourselves under British rule. The inference was obvious. Internal schisms had weakened the Hindus and made them vulnerable to foreign conquerors. The Raj, in an act of typical British mischief, announced a communal award with a separate electorate for the repressed classes on 16th August 1932. Gandhiji responded with his Brahmastra, a fast unto death. And then we know what happened. And look at what he says about Satyagraha. It is a law of Satyagraha that when a man has no weapons in his hands, and when he cannot think of a way out, he should take the final step up of giving up his body. Gandhiji's son Devdas concluded that though his father was frail, the issue was well worth the sacrifice. Whether Gandhiji lives or not, untouchability should die. Such Gandhian resolve and manifest persuasion led to a pact with Dr. Ambedkar, and we had joint electorates with a higher percentage of reserved seats. Subhash Bose, who had by then left for Austria, declared, however, that the Mahatma had failed. The national spirit had petered out, and Lord Wellington, the new viceroy, had little trouble in squashing the protest through the usual forms of intimidation. By June, the mass struggle had come to an end. From the perspective of political history, I quote Mr. Akbar, Gandhiji had been defeated again, not by British strength, but by Indian weakness. In 2022, it was violence. In 1933, it was untouchability. India would need a third campaign to win freedom. Even as he waged these arduous campaigns, Gandhiji labored ceaselessly to rejuvenate India's pride and unite its soul, all the while never losing an opportunity to gnaw and nibble at every exposed British weakness. The captain of nonviolence was patient with his tormentor, but having brought it to the point of wobble, he decided to deliver the knockout blow through a call to quit India in 1942. Gandhi's first instincts at the outbreak of World War II were pro-British. The vast majority of Indians, however, had no sympathy for London. A palpable Bose effect was in the air. Gandhi's isolation seemed to have begun. This is important. But Gandhiji was shrewd enough to realize that if he did not revive nationalist hope in non-violence, public opinion would move irretrievably towards armed resistance. This was the time when the Japanese were threatening us, World War II. As a wise general, I wonder if I can call him that, he realized that his generalship would be of little use if his soldiers began to doubt the efficacy of his non-violent wares. He now had to prevent the militarization of the masses and indeed the militarization of the Congress. He had to reinvent his favorite tool, non-violence, find a new utility and purpose for it. So by early 1942, he begins to consider a third mass campaign, a final do-or-die uprising that would end, as he put it, in either victory or death. On 14th May 42, Gandhi explained to London's News Chronicle, "If the British withdrawal left India in anarchy, as some fear it would, so be it. I say, in other words, leave India to God. I ask the British to give us the gift of anarchy." This Congress Working Committee adopted the Quit India resolution at an open session on 9th August, even as Gandhi sent an unequivocal message to the country. Look at this. Everyone is free to go the fullest length under ahimsa, complete deadlocks by strikes and other non-violent means. Satyagrahis must go out to die, not to live. Karenge ya marenge, we shall do or die, as we all know. By this time, Gandhi had aroused Indian passions to a point that made British rule anathema, while on a parallel course, Subhashji had led a Bose-armed uprising that captured imaginations of the Indians serving in the forces. So in my view, two parallel narratives were afoot. Karenge ya marenge and marenge ya marenge. Marenge ya marenge. On February 46, the ratings of the Royal Indian Navy, as we all know, seized the HMIS Talwar, leading to the naval mutiny, which in turn left about 236 dead and 1,156 injured. The British got the message: if Indians serving in the armed forces could no longer be trusted, the colonial project was over. I think at this point, the two narratives converge. The story of armed resistance to colonial occupation as a wider movement with an overarching strategy with international nodes, widespread support in the Indian National Congress, and driven by some extraordinary young men and women is just as salient in my view. In the days and months to follow, for various reasons, Gandhiji began to get increasingly isolated. In the words of the author, by 1946, the dictator of 1920, the salt pilgrim of 1930, and the unique inspiration of 1942 would be left on the sidelines. Gandhiji opposed partition. To end the horrific accompanying violence, he embarked on his 15th fast. Fast that once perplexed the British, now petrified the Congress, because they somehow always allowed Gandhi to have his say and have his way. As we all know, at 5:15 p.m. on 30th January 48, Gandhiji was shot dead. To quote Mr. Akbar, his death brought a bleeding, contrite, remorseful India slowly back to life. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's last campaign was over. A word about the Mahatma's worldview of violence and non-violence. I'll just take a minute. Did the Mahatma view non-violence as an absolute tenet? Now, that is extremely important to people like me. Apparently not. Mr. Akbar opines that Gandhi was a political leader and not a fundamentalist monk, and I agree. He did not look at non-violence as an absolute tenet applicable to every circumstance. In fact, he supported the British war effort from 1914 to 1918. In 1918, he nearly lost his life while trying to recruit soldiers in Gujarat for the British Army. In October 47, as Mr. Akbar said, when Pakistan invaded Kashmir, Gandhi set aside all non-violent reservations and gave his wholehearted support, explaining on 29th October of that year that the job of armed soldiers is to march ahead and repel the attacking enemy. That should dispel all doubts. To the architect and practitioner of soul force, brute force was not always anathema. His views of Bhagat Singh, published in the Navjivan in the March issue of 1931, are in fact adulatory and very nuanced. Look what he says. He says, Bhagat Singh did not wish to live. He refused to apologize. He declined to file an appeal. And now look at the nuance. Bhagat Singh was not a devotee of non-violence, but he did not subscribe to the religion of violence. He was prepared to commit murder out of a sense of helplessness. I don't know what it is. Is it wordplay or but a brilliant way of... And look at what he goes on to say. Heroes like him have conquered the fear of death. Let us bow to them for their heroism. This is a view of Bhagat Singh. So the acme of statecraft and operational art, as soldiers like me know, is to win without fighting. The Mahatma, in my view, exceeded the principle by an order of magnitude. Rather craftily, he forced the British to fight on terrain that they were unfamiliar with, non-violence and non-cooperation. A visibly confounded British had witnessed nothing like this before. They dismissed the metrics contemptuously as Gandhian vagaries, dubbing non-violence quixotic and non-cooperation whimsical. Gandhi's doctrine, on the other hand, was novel, carefully thought through, ethical and high-minded. Through astute generalship and a deep understanding of the political terrain, he developed the terminology, strategy, and tactics of a non-violent war that sometimes seemed unreal because it was unbelievable. He made Satyagraha a household word. He used a religious metaphor brilliantly to penetrate the consciousness of the masses without ever making religion a divisive ideology. He turned the concept of harmony embedded in every faith into a springboard of Indian unity. In my view, a masterly exposition of the smart, pragmatic use of power, not necessarily hard, but very effective. Just 30 seconds. George Bernard Shaw, when asked whether Gandhi should retire, had this to say: retire from what? His position is natural, not official. The Mahatma cannot hand over anything. Leadership is not a plug of tobacco that can be passed from one man to another. The Mahatma's legacy is truly unique as the spokesman for the conscience of all mankind. As the fount of such rare courage, one that always spoke the truth, even when he was in the minority of one. He was virtually isolated in the Congress. He demonstrated through his life and work that humility and simple truth are more powerful than empires, that true power speaks softly, it has no reason to shout. The Mahatma's place in history, therefore, in my view, is eternal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for a very